Howdy, folks. Alex Gibson, head of product here at Revcast, and here we are in Revcast. I want to take a few moments to share with you some of the stuff we've been working on through the middle of 2024 to set folks up for success as we enter planning season for fiscal year 2025. And we'll start here on our dashboard where we're looking at the current fiscal year and the current quarter. And, we'll note that in our demo instance, at least, things aren't going to plan. Both our sales attainment and our new sales are a bit off, even though our street quota, so the capacity we have to generate new business, is a bit higher than we would have planned. Probably like a lot of folks are seeing, maybe not as much headcount movement in the space, and maybe not as much revenue coming in, but we've got to adapt. And part of adapting is understanding our situation. We try to give you at Revcast a bunch of context, as we can see here on the dashboard, for how you're doing. As I scroll down a little bit, we can see even more metrics, core KPIs like win rate, average sales price, and deal velocity. And not only are we showing you some of these metrics versus the plan that you've implemented, but also versus what we have for you historically. So how are you doing versus your plan, and how are you doing versus the same time last year? So you can make appropriate decisions for what you might do going forward. And, of course, you can look not only at a snapshot for what's in real time, but also as we scroll down, you can get an idea over the past how things have changed, the trends of things like your aforementioned attainment, win rate, sales cycle, and ASP. And we can note that for most of these, it looks like there's some peaks and valleys, of course, which makes sense, but at least it gives us an idea of how we're trending over the course of the year. Then we can also, for some of these visuals, as I draw your eye down to the bottom of the dashboard, we can show you the future as well. And in this case, we're showing you how much pipeline you have that's open for not only the current quarter, but also future quarters. And based on this business, as we saw the KPIs a moment ago, our current total pipeline for this quarter is looking good, as long as we can progress some of these early stage opportunities, as we can see on the tooltip here. But our future pipeline looks like it might be just a little off, especially as we enter fiscal year 25. And speaking of fiscal year 25, let's keep some of this stuff in mind as we pivot over to our budget page and try to build a plan that's attainable for next year. All right, so here on our budget page, we'll note that we can see a few different things. Number one is our prior fiscal year's finalized plan, along with the current year's plan and that $18 million revenue target that was reflected there on the dashboard. We'll also note that it looks like some other folks, our CEO and CFO, have gotten a bit of a head start on planning and put their own drafts in there. And that's one of the nice things about Revcast, that folks can start drafting revenue capacity plans, but without finalizing them, you're not going to have an impact on what you're tracking or what other folks are planning. So you can work together collaboratively to build the right plan for your organization. If we look into this CEO's draft, we'll note that while their revenue target has expanded quite a bit from that 18 million that we likely aren't to hit this year anyway, and we've made a lot of investment across the organization, a lot of hires here on these teams to try to catch up and make sure that our street quota is high enough to hit that desired revenue target. Now, I think that what we probably want to do is build a plan that's a little less aggressive. And so what we're going to start with is a copy of the CEO's plan, which is going to give us a starting point and allow us to build something that's a little more reasonable. All right, I've renamed it to the aforementioned reasonable, and now we're going to come in and make some of those changes. The revenue target persists, but none of those investment decisions do. So the very first thing we're going to do is check out where we might need to make some changes. We start with our mid-market segment. Things look pretty good. Our revenue target and our street quota, our attainment, even our pipeline or capacity to generate pipeline looks pretty decent as we look over the whole year. However, in our enterprise department, that's where things are getting a little dicey, and I think where the CEO may have overestimated some stuff. So as we look at our high-level revenue targets, we can see that that one for the Enterprise AE Team Blue and AE Team Teal is a little off. So let's go ahead and edit those and see how we might get to a more attainable, reasonable approach. All right, we've updated those revenue targets and we can see in real time the numbers change and note that our attainment is a bit more reasonable. Now, as mentioned prior, we have not made any investment decisions. So, whereas we don't want to be quite as aggressive as the CEO with hiring, we do want to account for what might happen in our business. And so, what we'll do is we'll go ahead because we know that we're going to be able to add an AE per team and we're going to reflect that. But we're also going to reflect potential attrition that naturally happens with our business so that we can get a true sense of what might occur. And as we look at that attrition, we'll go ahead and make the backfill on the team and note that up at the top, those metrics then once again look a bit more aligned. So over the course of the year, we can know what to expect month over month, quarter over quarter, and I'll quickly make those updates to the other enterprise teams as well. All right, we've made the necessary changes to our enterprise AE teams and we click back to the enterprise segment. We'll note that our metrics look a bit more in line, at least a good, reasonable starting point, including the capacity to generate pipeline, which, as we remember from our dashboard, was one of our potential concerns given the lack of pipeline for early fiscal year 25. If we look at our BDR team, one of the core generators of pipeline, we can look at the team's timeline and note that there is a potential risk because one of the headcount that they expect to be in seat is an expected hire from this year that's already late. The expected hire was expected to be in seat in June of this year, but it's August and they're not yet there. So this is a risk that we may need to bring up with our hiring department. Now, of course, we could model an additional hire onto the BDR team if we wanted, or we could also look at transferring people throughout the organization. And how might we know who's most ripe for a transfer or promotion or something to that effect? That's another thing that Revcast helps us with. Let's take a look now. All right, so our budget is looking pretty good, and maybe we're making some last headcount changes before we take it back to iterate again with the CEO and CFO. But as promised, how might we get an idea of which of our employees are most ready for a promotion or the like? We can come in here on our employees page, search and click into an individual and see not only their status now via this employee quarterly scorecard, some metrics that overlap with but aren't exactly the same as those on the dashboard, but you can also see the history of this person's attainment with the business, including this grayed out period, which is their ramping time. So we note that in this example, Sandra did pretty well with closing new business. Maybe there was some opportunities already queued up for, and has been pretty consistent throughout her tenure with the organization. Her pipeline attainment has been similar, if not a bit reversed, with kind of doing better more recently as opposed to when she first onboarded. If you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to see your data in Revcast, or if you'd like to use the product to try to build a reasonable plan, maybe even in the face of something more aggressive, let us know and check us out at revcast.com.